Today's guest is Eriksen Dickens, co-founder and creative director at Platinum Peak. Eriksen and his brother Soren developed the Legacy documentary after he directed his first feature honoring the life of his deceased father. Welcome to the show, Eriksen.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to be on. Good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. I'm always kind of curious how one gets into video production and filmmaking. What was your start?
That's a great question. So when we were younger, my brother and I, my younger brother Soren, we used to make movies, right? Like home videos and whatnot, costumes, props, we went all out. Unfortunately, sports took priority. We were both athletes growing up, and so that childhood passion got kicked to the curb a little bit, put on the shelf. And then when we got to college, we were both collegiate athletes, but we ended up both getting hurt. He was a swimmer, I was a baseball player, and we both ended up at the same college. And we were like, okay, what do we do with our lives now? Now that our sports careers are over, that identity was kind of gone. Who are we now? And so long story short, we faced like a period of kind of an identity crisis, like, okay, what do we do now? And it was my brother's idea actually to get back into our childhood love of filmmaking, making movies. So put some money together and we purchased a camera. And one thing led to another. We just kind of rekindled that childhood passion. It sounds kind of cliche, but it started out in a dingy college dorm room. You know what I mean? One of those type of stories. And we just started getting after it. I mean, we were self-taught. We didn't go to film school or any of that. Watched a lot of YouTube videos. And one thing led to another, and it just snowballed from there. Yeah.
Can you tell us how you created legacy documentary style of storytelling?
Yeah.
Like what got you into that? I know that your father passed away when you were in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so he passed away when I was 14. And, it's one of those things where I felt like I never really fully processed it at that time because I was so young. When your parent dies at a young age, it's kind of a shock, right? And so, years went by, and when we got back into filmmaking, the first thing that kind of came to my mind is like, what if we made a documentary honoring our father? And so we put our heads together, and we had no experience making documentary films at that point. We were just doing more so montages, event videos, just simple stuff, getting back into the game. But we were like, okay, let's challenge ourselves here. If we can put together a full-fledged documentary, not only is that going to honor our father and help us in a processing way, but it will also help us develop our skills as filmmakers. So this is something we want to do in the future. And so that started about a year-long process of interviewing, family members, old friends. My dad was a baseball coach. He was our childhood baseball coach. Long story there, but I won't go into that. So we interviewed a bunch of my old teammates and family members of those teammates, really trying to craft a very robust picture of, my dad's life, and not just my dad's life, but also the people that he impacted. Long story short, we ended up creating about an 1.5 hour long documentary, and we premiered it here in our hometown. Got about 300 people to come out. My dad was pretty well known in the community, so we were able to cultivate an audience for it. And it really just gave us that confidence that we have something special here. Like, this is cool. This is it preserves his legacy. I mean, the film's literally called His Legacy. And so from there, we just started to think, what if we did this for other people, right? They doesn't have to be deceased already. They can still be living. And we started to think about the fact that people do put a lot of emphasis on how they want to be remembered. I read this one study, actually, is very interesting. The psychologist did a study on how people view legacy. And he did this thought experiment where he interviewed a bunch of people. And he said, I want you to pick scenario 1 or scenario 2. Scenario 1 was you have a very successful life, you're very well known, but after you pass away, something comes out about you that changes people's perspective of you, and you're no longer viewed in a good light. And then scenario 2 is you live a relatively obscure life and no one really knows about you. You don't have a very good life, but after you pass away, all of a sudden people find something out about you and you are all of a sudden remembered and you're viewed in a very notable light. And believe it or not, the majority of people overwhelmingly pick the second scenario, even though they're not around anymore, they're deceased and they can't experience that external validation. They still chose being remembered after, as opposed to living a life that's more successful and more well-known. So long story short, it just really got us thinking that, okay, this is something we can actually develop into our agency, cultivate it, and maybe offer it to clients who might be interested in it. So,
well,
yeah.
and I love that idea of legacy because it's just so ironic that I have you on as a guest, and a couple of my friends were talking about that. One of my friends' partners passed away from cancer, and they were just looking at their life, just thinking, well, this person was so well known in their community, and well, who am I? And I was thinking, God, legacy is, we all have one. We all affect people. Maybe some people affect at a bigger scale, like you said, and other people affect at more in their communities. But it doesn't mean that they don't affect people. So I love that you're bringing that up of everybody's got a story, and as long as you're affecting some people, I mean, that means a lot, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it can start very small. It can start within your family. It can then trickles into your friend group, all those different ecosystems. But you don't have to have a huge, successful, quote unquote, life to impact somebody in a positive way. And, you ask people, what do you want your legacy to be? And oftentimes it kind of catches them off guard. They're like, well, I think about some of that stuff, but I don't know. Like, I don't really know as of now. And it's a question that's actually very fun to explore. So let me ask you, like, what do you want your legacy to be? Thinking about it, I'll put you on the spot.
I know. I was worried you were going to do that because I was just thinking, well, what would I want? Well, I think that I would want people to think of me as somebody that really listened to and really wanted to get to know people and was very curious about people, was there for people during, good times and bad times. I think I pride myself in that I really care about people. I care about their story. I want to know. Yeah. I'm curious. I ask a lot of questions. So I hope that I would be remembered as that, as somebody who genuinely cared about the people around them.
I love that.
Is that good? Is that a
there's
good
no right or
legacy
wrong answer. That's
I mean,
that's beautiful. No, I can relate to that a lot. Sometimes my brother and I will always say, like, our story is telling yours. Like, at the end of the day, that's kind of how we want to be remembered to an extent, is like our overall story is telling yours, asking the questions, being curious, and then telling your story in a way that is respectable and matches your vision of yourself. So, yeah.
I love it. And I love that you're also taking people's stories before they die, because it's kind of like you're giving them the light of having people see them and that they can see how people see them.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah.
Because we all wonder what's going to happen at our funeral, or, well, not everybody, maybe just some of us wonder that. But I was thinking, like, I wonder if you wonder about that, where, like, will anybody come, or what will people say? And, you don't get to hear those kind of things half the time.
Totally. And this is like giving people a way to almost experience their funeral in a way before that time actually comes. Because like you said, most of the time you don't really hear what people really think about you ever. Because once you pass away, you don't get all that. Like, just an example, like my grandpa, he's still alive. He actually said that he wants to have a funeral for himself before he passes away, just so he can hear what people say about him. And, I don't think that's necessarily ego driven. It can be for some people, but at the same time, it's human. It's human to want to know the impact that you've had, to get that type of external validation, to know the impact that you've had. And that was the case of one of our films, actually, Son of the Old Country, that you referenced earlier, 2-hour documentary we did for a gentleman. And, I remember some of the feedback we got from that was seeing his life played out like that. Not only did it educate other people, like his family members, on his life, but to see his life actually crafted together in a story, it was almost like he started to see things in a different way, and it changed almost his perspective. It's very powerful to watch a story unfold of your own life, because you don't think about things like when you're in the moment, when you're living it, you don't necessarily see it the way that it is like in a story, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and don't you get to participate in that storytelling?
Well, you mean me personally or the
I
person?
mean, no, him.
Oh, yeah.
Because he get to talk about his own life and
Yeah.
his own story, which is, why don't we start with like Son of the Old Country? What was the story about and how did it come to you?
Son of the Old Country, that was a great experience, a great 2-year experience. Long story short, we were talking to this gentleman, his name is Charles Khalil, and his daughter, we were talking to her about some business stuff. She owns a business, essentially a marketing company, and she was going to do some work with us. And we started talking about our offers, what we kind of do, and we got on the topic of documentaries and legacy documentaries specifically. And she was very fascinated by that. And she was like, you know what? My dad would be a perfect candidate for this. He's lived an incredible life, rags to riches story. That's something that we've talked about in the past. Like, dad, we should like get a movie made about you, a documentary. And so we started talking more about that option with her and, whether or not her dad would want something like that. Her dad is, he was more reserved and she didn't know exactly if he'd be totally on board for that. Long story short, we started talking more with her and eventually we're like, okay, like we can actually do something here. So that started the beginning of a 2-year process. I mean, I met the gentleman, Charles, and it was just really cool to not only act as like an investigative journalist, but like a therapist in a way, sitting one-on-one with somebody, getting to know the intricacies of their life, their obstacles, their pain, their successes. And so we spent about close to 6 months in the pre-production process, and not only interviewing Charles numerous times, but all of his family members. He has 5 kids now who are all very successful entrepreneurs in their own right. We started to dive into his social circle, his friends, so we can piece together the mouthpieces we needed to drive the story forward. During that time where we really developed our kind of storytelling framework, and I come from a background in psychology, and we started to dive into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that basically is like a psychological framework for somebody. Like we started with the physiological needs, which is basically the basic needs of life. And so that allowed us to dive into his early years and what he experienced and what he didn't that would shape him to who he became. And then after that, we dive into the safety and security stage. So that's about like the pursuit of stability, health, protection. After that, we dive into love and belonging, which is relationships with people, connections. After that would be self-esteem, external validation from people, recognition. And then finally, we would reach self-actualization, which is when somebody kind of comes fully into themselves. That's where they really are at their peak. That's where they're allowed to really express their creativity, their ethics, morality, etc. So we developed that framework by going through this process. Spent a lot of time in Los Angeles where he was with this gentleman, really getting to know him, lots of filming. It's an incredible life. I mean, he immigrated to Lebanon, from Lebanon at an early age in the 1970s with like $50 in his pocket, came here. He lost his mom to cancer at an early age. So right off the bat, I could relate to this gentleman, the pain that he experienced as a kid, having lost my dad. What else? He came here and he just jumped right in. He didn't know the language. He had no connections here. And he built a empire through mobile oil, real estate, while raising 5 kids. He ended up losing his beloved wife to early onset dementia, which was just insane. He experienced cancer himself, had some heart issues, just a lot of adversity that he faced, and we were able to tell his story in full. I remember his main mission for us, they really wanted us to figure out more about their dad. They knew his story, they knew parts about it, but they wanted us to really dive in and figure things out that maybe they didn't know, so they can learn more. And the overall goal was really to preserve his legacy for future generations. So, his grandkids will know about his story, what he overcame, and then their kids will eventually know about his story. And long story short, it was a 2-year process, and afterwards it was just a very cathartic experience for the family, and it was really reassuring for us to know that we had done the job, and we felt like family to them. They consider us family now, we consider them family, and they said it was almost like a therapeutic process for them because all this stuff came out, they got closer, they bonded, and so it's like it made us think like this is more than just a product or a service. It's almost an experience in a way. So there's your snapshot. I can go down a bunch of different rabbit holes, but I don't want to go too far and
No,
busted it. But there you go.
no, I think that that's really great because, when you really share of yourself, it's not just about like the business, it's about you. It's about how you did it. Of course, that would bring closeness, I would think, as the whole family is sharing their experiences too, because they went along the ride as well. It's not just him, because the kids are a part of that. So what kind of people are you looking for when it comes to legacy documentaries, and what is the value that they will get? Which I've heard some of it is connection. You get to know things that maybe you wouldn't have known because you didn't ask the right questions or wouldn't even know to ask those questions, especially with our parents and our grandparents, because they're not going to be around, as we know. Some of us lose our parents early on. Some of us lose it later. It's all those things that we don't even think to ask. And when they're gone, they're gone. It's like, you're not going to get that answer anymore. Maybe you could get a little bit from people who knew them, but again, it's through a different lens.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah.
Sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
no, yeah.
What kind of people are looking for this, and then what is the value or other values that you feel?
Right. I mean, it really can be anyone with a noteworthy story. Generally speaking, the clients we've worked with, they are a little bit later in life. This is most of the time when they've already developed their story. In a way, they're on the latter part. They're in that self-actualization phase of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're in that stage where they are pondering more and more, how will I be remembered? How have I impacted my family, my friends, the community? But in terms of profession, industry, legacy documentaries, we don't discriminate, right? It's like it can be for anybody.
Right, yeah.
Business owners, entrepreneurs, pretty much anyone with a story that they want out there. We've worked with, inventors, we've worked with, real estate developers, we've worked with rodeo stars, we've worked with Rotary, the group Rotary that does a lot of amazing philanthropic work, created a legacy documentary for an initiative that they're doing there. Instead of focusing on a certain person, we focused more on the organization as a whole, turn that into a character in itself. And these aren't necessarily just tailored towards individuals either. They can be tailored towards businesses, companies. One initiative we're running right now is trying to find companies that have been around for 25, 50 years because, it's a celebration, right? These can be used as a celebration of a long-standing business. Aside from just legacy preservation and that intrinsic type of value that someone can get from a piece like that, and the fact that future generations can learn from your mistakes, learn from your successes, but it can also be used as a marketing tool, right? Like if you're a business, these documentaries can be used for the three main pillars of any business, which is their sales, their marketing, their operations. The documentaries can be segmented, repurposed to potential clients, investors, and maybe recruitment needs to give people an insight on your company culture, whatever it might be. Because people relate to stories, right? Stories are like the universal language. They've always been. I mean, it's like the oldest kind of fundamental form of communication in a way. There's a lot of studies that have been done about the fact that if you tell somebody just general information or general facts, they have a less likelihood of retaining that information as opposed to that information being told in a story. So storytelling is an extremely powerful tool. And so on one side of the pendulum, you can use these documentaries for legacy preservation, for just more inside your own inner circle, share it with your family, your friends. But if you are still active in your business or whatever it might be, your company, you can also leverage these documentaries as a way to enhance your marketing, whatever it might be, whatever needs, whatever problems you might be facing. You can use storytelling as a tool for that as well. So to answer your question, I mean, documentaries like this can be used in a wide variety of reasons, in a wide variety of industries for people, different types of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that we're at a time about connection and storytelling, and we don't want to just be sold to. We want to get to know you, especially with social media. Things are being more personalized
100%.
Versus buy my book.
Yeah.
It's like what you were saying about the legacy and the videos, obviously, well, I don't know if this is obvious or not, but as we get older, we mature and we have more wisdom than when we're like younger. So there's a lot more to share. And I think sometimes you have to live life to get there, to have something to share and to learn through your trials and tribulations.
Right.
And I think that's a great idea with the companies, especially companies that have been around for a long time. It's like, what was the evolution of it? How did it start? Where is it now? How did they have to pivot? Because, with every company, you're never going to just do the same thing. You have to pivot at some point, especially with now social media.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm seeing singers on there, dancers, wow, what an avenue to get who you are out there if you're hidden in a small town or community. So this is like amazing. And also the repurposing of the videos, you do, like a documentary of an hour, hour and a half, you can cut that up into smaller chunks, as we know, and just like little sound bites.
Totally.
That you, so.
And some clients we've found that because people's attention spans these days are a little lackluster. People have a hard time watching a full hour or 45 minutes or whatever it might be. So we found that in some situations, clients will actually prefer a series of short form deliverables as opposed to one big long form. Like they'd rather have the documentary kind of pieced up into like, a minute videos, shorter deliverables, because they're easier digested and they can be repurposed in different avenues that way. And so, 100%, it's I think if people understood the power of storytelling a little bit more, it can be educational, it can be entertaining, but in reality, it can be a very powerful tool as well to connect with people, because people, like you said, they don't want to be necessarily just sold to, right? They want to understand a little bit more about you, what drives you, what's your motivations, because then they can view you more relatable. Relatability builds trust. So if you're vulnerable about your story and your successes and the obstacles that you also went through, people are generally more likely to view you as credible, vulnerable, and people can get behind that easier, especially in this day and age. So we learned that over time.
No. Yeah. And fortunately or unfortunately with the 1 minute videos, it's so hard. I mean, I even find myself hard to, watch something that's longer, because it's like, okay, get to it. I find myself watching things at double time just because I have to absorb it. I absorb it very quickly. So I think tips, and somebody who's been around and done things for a long time has a lot of knowledge to offer people that you can use. And I see that too, is like just getting those little sound bites, question, answer. Unfortunately, we have to cut out all the pauses. We got to tighten it up, and
the fun part of editing. Yeah. No, people love value-driven content. I mean, you see it on social media, Instagram, whatever it might be. You see those people in positions of authority providing value, answering questions to help their target audience with their problems, being that source of knowledge for people. That goes a long way. And I think that's why a lot of businesses are starting to use increasingly more video content. And if you can intertwine your story, what you want your legacy to be to your story, your start to where you're at now, if you could intertwine that in the value that you're providing, not only are you providing information and value, but you're also letting people in on your story. And I think that's a double-edged sword there. That can be very powerful.
Yes. Yeah. And also people that are getting old, that's what I was thinking about even with this podcast, is like filmmakers that are now in their late 70s, 80s, maybe even into their 90s. I'm thinking, shoot, we got to be interviewing them now. This is the time to hear their story before we don't have a chance to be able to do that anymore. I think that your videos really give a huge purpose for people to really know things that maybe they wouldn't know. And especially at the end of somebody's life or near the end of somebody's life, what's the most important? I mean, I hear that all the time, like, what would you give advice to somebody who's younger? And it's always like, don't care what people think. And just like, it's not what I think as your younger would think they'd be. So it's valuing people. And that's exactly what you're doing. Is there any projects you're working on now that you want to talk about or share?
Right now, we're kind of in between. We have a couple people we're in that the early stages of, do they want to move forward? Do they not want to move forward? But as of now, we don't have a current project, a legacy documentary that we're currently working on. We're trying to get some stuff going with a few different companies who are interested. But as of right now, we don't have one that we're actually working on. Took kind of a little bit of a break from them after that 2-year-long documentary we did, Son of the Old Country. That was a long process. So right now we're kind of in the weeds, seeing what we come up with next, seeing where the next story comes from. So staying optimistic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've got something there. I mean, it's like really pitching shorter videos to companies to say that let us tell your story in short videos for TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and all the channels. And your website too, is good. Any tips out there or anything you want to pitch as we close?
Oh boy. Well, I would say just be mindful throughout your life, for all those who are listening, about what you want your legacy to be and the actions that you can take today that will bring you 1 inch closer to how you do want to be remembered. I mean, at the end of the day, like that study showed that we discussed a little bit earlier, towards the end of the road, you do start to think about those things. So, really start to be more mindful of the impact that you're having on people and how you want to be remembered and whose lives that you are influencing and whose lives that you can influence. And I would say also, don't be afraid to share your story in terms of, I noticed that a lot of the most successful people sometimes are the most hesitant to share their story. They're more reserved, or they just maybe they don't have that drive. Oh, I don't need a film made about me, or I don't want to be the center of attention. It's let my work show. But no, I mean, you should be proud of what you've accomplished. And, everybody, the noteworthy story deserves to have that story shared. And you never know whose lives you can touch indirectly. I mean, you don't have to necessarily know people. Set yourself up to be able to speak from the grave once your time is gone, and your legacy will live on forever. So, yeah, no, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah, thank you, and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much. You too. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @TammyMcGarrow. Until we meet again, what's your story?